How's everyone doing this morning? You're having a better time than me. I can't even figure out how to move this thing. So, I don't know if any of you have ever liked to read weird stories on the internet that are just kind of random, okay? But I read this one and it stuck out to me when I was preparing this message. There was a guy named Calvin Newman who lives in Texas. And in 2017, he was doing what a lot of us do on the weekends, where he was repairing some things at his house, and he was fixing his fence this day in 2017. And you know how fixing things at your house can go. You end up walking away with like 1 or 2 injuries, right? Anyone ever have that? You know, you hit your thumb with a hammer and you say things you know you shouldn't say, and you know, that kind of thing happens. And so that happened to him. He got a small cut on his hand. I mean, you're fixing a fence. I mean, that's no big deal. And probably like 99% of us guys would do, he didn't think much of it. Right? He just went on about his day. And but what happened was, after a few days, it started swelling and becoming increasingly painful. And it got so bad that his wife said, "Hey, look, you're going to the ER if I have to, punch you out and drive you there." And thank God he did, because as it turns out, believe it or not, he somehow had necrotizing fasciitis. And for those of us that are not medical doctors, in layman's terms, that's a flesh-eating bacteria. And it got so bad that he had to undergo multiple surgeries to save his life. And he did live. Now, I tell you that story so that those of us who wrestle with hypochondria will keep busy. No, I'm just kidding. Not at all. Here's why I tell you that story, okay? I tell you that because it just kind of, this principle stuck out to me when I was thinking about what he went through. And the reality is, it's this: if we don't deal with the seemingly small things in real time, they can become big things in no time. Right? If you don't deal with the seemingly small things in a prompt manner, they become huge things before you even know it. Right? So we're in our series called "To My Friend Who Left the Faith." And in our series, we're talking about how people walk away from their faith. And it happens all the time. And so the question to us who are still walking in faith is, how do we respond? And if at all possible, how can we maybe prevent this, or how can we help the people who are wrestling with this? I mean, is there anything that we can do? And today, I want to talk about one of the number one reasons why people walk away from their faith, and it's because we don't deal with our doubts. We don't deal with our doubts. Just a quick show of hands. How many people in this audience have ever dealt with doubt? Oh, man, praise you for being honest. How many in this audience have never had a doubt in their life? Okay, you just didn't raise your hand because you didn't feel like it. That's okay. Here's the reality. Everyone deals with doubt. Everyone doubts themselves. Everyone doubts their situation. Everyone doubts their faith. And if you're shocked by me saying that, I would wonder why. Our faith is a complex thing, and it's not easy. And so often, we just don't deal with our doubt. And here's the issue. Just like Calvin Newman faced, if we don't address our doubts, even when they're small and in real time, our doubts become big in no time. Isn't that true? And so we need to do this. I'm going to give an example of how this happens. Has anyone ever heard of a lady named Ruth Tucker? Okay, so Ruth Tucker grew up in a conservative Christian family. She was taught the Bible her entire life. She believed the Bible. And she even became a professor at Calvin Theological Seminary. Okay, so this lady is a professor. She taught classes and even wrote books on theology. And what happened to her is that over time, she never addressed these little doubts that she started to wrestle with. And the reason that she didn't address them is because at first she thought they weren't that big of a deal. And then after a while she started to not address them because she started to have fear that she might lose her job. Or maybe she would face scrutiny from colleagues like, how can you doubt? But those little doubts eventually became massive doubts. And in 2001, she quit her job and she walked away from her faith, and she wrote a memoir called Walking Away from Faith. Now here's the sad reality. This happens more than any of us would like to admit, doesn't it? Unfortunately, the reaction for most is when we hear stories like that, we sit around and we play the blame game, don't we? Right? This is the game where no one wins and a lot is lost. Right? Yeah, oh, it's the church's fault. Oh, it's her fault. Oh, it's her family's fault. It's society's fault. It's somebody's fault. Or maybe it's the doubter's fault. But here's the truth for us as Christ followers. We are not to be ruled by emotions, and we're not to be reactionary. Right? We are to take action, but as directed by the Lord and in the manner he calls us to. And so what we do is we pray for those who attack us. And if we do these things, if we address these things, we will serve King Jesus well. Do you believe that? So here's what I want to do for the rest of our time together this morning. The first part of this, I want to talk to us who are followers of Jesus, okay? And for those of us that feel like, we're strong in our faith, I also want you to realize that at some point, you too will be on the other end of what we're going to talk about, where you will wrestle with doubts, okay? So I first want to talk to Christians and how to handle people who doubt, and then I want to talk to people who are wrestling currently with doubt and what you ought to do, all right? So that's how I want to go about this. So first, I want to talk to those of us that are sitting here, and I want us to say, okay, how do we handle it when there are people among us who are Christ followers who are dealing with doubt? All right, so I want to read a very amazing and powerful scripture that I think many people don't read because it's one of the shortest books in the Bible. In fact, it's so short, it is one chapter, right? It's a book in the Bible that doesn't say, well, chapter 1, chapter 2. It's just boom, one little chapter. And so it's the book of Jude, all right? Jude, verse 22. This is easy to memorize, everybody. 6 words. It'll be up here on the screen, and I'd like for you to read it with me. Ready? Jude, verse 22 says, be what? Be merciful to those who doubt. Now, if you can remember any scripture, this is one you can remember, right? It's almost as easy as Jesus wept. Be merciful to those who doubt. Now, why would Jude write these words? Be merciful to those who doubt. See, the idea of mercy implies the holding back of full force. Right? Now, why would he write that? Well, I think here's why. I think because he understands the human heart. He understands the human heart. When you and I are for something, what do we tend to do about those people or those things that are against something we're for? What do? We attack them, right? We attack it, right? I mean, if I'm for my football team, I'm going to be against the rival of my football team, right? And I feel that from y'all because I'm a Steelers fan, right? I get hazed all the time, right? That's what we do. If we're for something, anything that stands against it, we're going to attack. This happens oftentimes in faith too. If somebody is dealing with a doubt, and a well-meaning Christian can become an attacker without meaning to be. I was at an outing with a bunch of friends years ago, and one of them, was kind of fairly new to the group. We didn't really know him that well. But he was sharing his story, bits of his story, about how he used to have faith. He used to follow Jesus. He used to believe in Jesus. And he was giving this story about why he completely walked away and said, there is no God, right? But the weird thing is, in his expression of claiming there was no God, you can sense this palpable animosity about God. And I thought that was interesting. Like, I just took note. I didn't say anything about it, but I took note because I thought, how could you be mad at something you don't believe in anymore? Right? And so I was like, man, there really is a faith there, but this is like a doubt that's taken over, right? And there was a well-meaning friend there, and she, what she wanted to do is she wanted to kind of instill faith in him that he once had. She had a good intention. She really did. But what ended up happening was she was so like in tune with the logic of faith that it came across as an attack and not a help. And she had no idea that that's what she was doing. And it just made the situation worse. So here's the question I want us to kind of grapple with. What does Jude mean when he says, be merciful to those who doubt? I want to give us a few ways to look at this. Okay, the first one is this. I think Jude means that we need to be gentle with those expressing and experiencing doubts. Be gentle with. Let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever gotten a box and when it got delivered to your door, it had the words on top of it, fragile? How many of you? All right, what's the first thing you do when you get a box like that? Okay. The first thing I do is I say the Christmas storyline and say, fragile, must be Italian, okay? You have to get that out of the way first. But once you do that, right, the reality is you handle that box with care. That's what you do, right? You don't shake it, Janine, I know. I love it. She has a master's degree in sarcasm. It's beautiful. But you handle it with care. Things that are labeled fragile, man, they're labeled that way for a reason, right? I mean, you keep it the right side up. Like you get the packages that's like this side up, right? Well, what happens if you put it down? No, you don't do that. When people are dealing with doubts, here's the reality. They're in a fragile place, okay? Fragile doesn't mean weak. Fragile means fragile. I want you to think about this because oftentimes we don't like that feeling of feeling fragile, but we've all been fragile, okay? Don't equate something fragile as something that has less worth or less toughness, okay? Some of the things that are the most fragile are the most pricey, aren't they? And I would say that that is true of our faith too. And so if you're in a place where you're dealing with doubt, you are fragile. And those of us that want to interact with you must understand that. We don't come at you loaded hot with information. Right? That's usually our first reaction. Our first reaction is to attack the logic, to come to a place where we want to give them all these, great arguments for why faith is real and why God is real and what God's doing. Listen, we need to slow it down. Listen to what they're saying. Don't immediately shoot down their arguments, right? God is a big God. He doesn't get nervous when someone's talking about why they doubt him. God doesn't backpedal and say, I got to defend myself. He's so big he can handle this. And so we need to listen, not be dismissive. What do? We want to hear what their heartbeat is. What really is causing the doubts? And when I was thinking about that story with my friend who was expressing his doubt, what dawned on me was, I find it interesting that a lot of people who make that decision to walk away from their faith, they almost always claim that it was logic that made them walk away from faith. But what I find more and more, and this isn't a knock on them, but what I find more and more is it was some sort of pain that caused you to walk away in the first place, and then what you do is you justify your walking away with the logic behind it, right? And so you really need to understand that and wrap your brain around it because you're dealing with something much more complex than just a logic or informational issue. There's something behind it. So listen, ask questions, build a stronger relational connection, and see if you can establish a way or multiple ways to follow up. Brass tacks about it, here's what I like to say about it. If we want to be the people of Jesus, we have to care more about the person than we do about winning. And men, I'm speaking more particularly to us because often that's the case for us, isn't it? We care more about winning than we often do about the person. And we think if we win, then we're doing the person justice. We have to separate those two. I find it interesting that the word that Jude uses here for be merciful, it's a Greek word that's used in the medical field. And it was used it's literally a word that says you treat the afflicted and the wounded. That's what the word merciful means. I'm going to treat someone who's afflicted or who's wounded. Second thing we need to do, so we be gentle with those. The second thing is we need to make room for our doubts and questions. You ever thought about that? That we need to make room for people who doubt and question, including ourselves. You know, one of the things that's always bothered me the most about church? It's bothered me always, okay? The thing that's bothered me always, ever since I started going to church, and I don't know any other way of saying this, but I like to refer to it as church face. Does anyone know what I mean when I say church face? More than any other place, when you go to church and you ask somebody, I don't know what, well, I kind of do know why this is, but it's weird. I think it's a thing from the enemy. But for whatever reason, we all feel this. We could all relate to this. When you go to church, you could be hurting, you could be broken, you could be dealing with everything. But when someone walks up to you and says, hey, how you doing? For whatever reason, your reaction is, I'm great. You ain't great. Right? Like I don't know why we feel that we have to, but we're like, well, I'm in church, right? The beauty and majesty of God, he's so good. I have to say that, right? I mean, what's going to happen if I don't? The church police are going to come and they're going to be like, oh, you know? But church face is such a bothersome thing. And it's always made me think, like, what about the people who are hurting and beat up and dealing with doubt? Like, we need to create spaces for that. Right? And we need to watch our reactions to that. I've always had this dream of kind of, I don't know if I'd call it a ministry, what, but I've had this dream that there would be a place in churches, just like all over, that would be called Doubter's Corner, right? It'd be a place where anybody could come with their questions, their doubts, their concerns, and they could be expressed and examined up front. And we could come to that place, and people in the place of faith can come and try to lead those other people to a place of faith, but do it through compassion and caring and understanding that this is going to take time. This ain't going to be one conversation and, oh, you know, I fixed you. But it's a place to express all of that without fear of getting yelled at or being canceled or whatever. If our faith is real, here's the reality, guys. It can stand up to scrutiny. We can listen to people's questions. We need to make room for people who doubt. We need to have people we can go to. All right, so for the rest of my time, here's what I want to do. I want to talk to anybody in the audience, whether you're a Christian or maybe you've never made that decision, or you've never made that decision because you have doubts, right? You have a lot of doubts and a lot of questions. Here's what I'm not going to do. I am not going to spend my time walking through the Bible, explaining everything about, you know, why it's real and blah, 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 you know, answering all these, you know, crazy scientific and logical questions. Here's what I want to do. I want to take a moment to talk to those of us who are wrestling with doubt. And maybe right now in that wrestling match, doubt is winning big time. But here's what I want to say to you first. Take heart. If you didn't even want faith in your life at all, I don't think you'd be here. right? And so here's the thing. If you are struggling with doubt and you forced yourself to be here, you're already winning, and I'm grateful for you. You came to a place. You can't think about that for a second, okay? You came to a place to hear and do something about it. That is amazing to me. The church sees that, but way more importantly, the Lord sees that. He guided you. He's walking with you. And He's with you. Take heart. You're here. So what do you do now? Like, what do I do? What do I do when I'm struggling with faith? Here's the first thing I'd like you to do. It's my suggestion, okay? Go first to the Lord directly. Right? Now, that just sounds like something a preacher's got to say. It really does, doesn't it? But I want to break this down a little bit, okay? Here's what I want you to know. Here's why I'm telling you to do this. God does not despise you because you're wrestling with doubt. He knows you're wrestling with doubt. He made you human. And by definition, being human and not divine means that we are fragile. Right? You're dealing with doubt. God does not despise you. He's not up there looking at you like, all this evidence I've given him. Right? All this evidence. And you want to doubt me? Right? He's not doing that. All right? God's looking at you and He's saying, I know it's hard. All right? I'll give you a perfectly good example of this. If you don't believe me that that's how God feels about you, I want you to remember the story of Thomas. Okay? Thomas followed Jesus for 3.5 years. Like, followed him, like, not like was a fan of him. No. Thomas literally saw everything Jesus did, every miracle. He was prayed with Jesus. He saw Jesus do incredible things like the turning water into wine that Ryan talked about. Thomas was there, okay? When Jesus fed the crowds, Thomas was there. When Jesus healed people who were covered in leprosy and Jesus said, ha ha, and then it was gone. Thomas was there. He saw it all. And then Jesus even said, hey, here's what's going to happen, guys. They're going to crucify me, and I'm going to die. But guess what? I'm coming back. And Thomas said, okay, whatever, that's really weird. And then he dies. And Thomas and the other disciples are like, well, it's over now. I don't know what we're going to do. We've been like away from the world for 3.5 years. We all lost our jobs. And then the brothers come and they say, Thomas, He's resurrected. We saw Him. And Thomas says, I trust you guys. I've been with you forever. You're right. No, he says, fat chance. You remember this? Like, I'm not making this up. This is in the Bible. And Thomas looks at his best friends and he says, I won't believe you unless I touched the wounds myself. That's like a big, bold statement. Like, I refuse. That's not just doubt. He's like, I'm certain you're wrong. And then Jesus shows up while Thomas is there. And here's something really cool that you never pick up on. The time that Jesus showed up when Thomas was there, one of the things Jesus did that was really interesting is because a lot of people still believe that Jesus' resurrection wasn't like a bodily resurrection, like He didn't have flesh. They believe He was a ghost. But if you look at the accounts, they specifically wrote them this way to disprove that, because Jesus sat and ate food with them. Now, I don't know what your philosophy about ghosts are, but I'm pretty sure they don't have a stomach. So, like, how do they eat, right? I mean, look, if you're basing this on Slimer from Ghostbusters, we should talk, because that is fictitious, right? But, like he actually came and He ate. So, like, right off the gate, knowing Thomas was there, Jesus says, hey, I'm going to show you that it's really me. I'm going to eat a meal with you. And then after the meal, He walked up to Thomas and He just said, hey, just so you know, your brothers didn't like squeal on you. I heard you when you said you only believe. And He walks right up to him and says, hey, Thomas, touch. Put your fingers in. I think I've always read that wrong, because I've always think that He's like, Thomas, get over here. I'll show you. No, I think Jesus was like, hey, I'm big enough and real enough. I get that you're dealing with doubt, Thomas. And I want you to move to a place. Here's the key. I want you to move to a place of faith. And if it means I'm going to have to show up and show you sometimes, I'm going to try. You see, this is why you go directly to God. He's not going to chase you off. He's going to be there for you. He's going to show himself to you. This is why Paul says, and this would be another text to read, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul would also deal with people in Corinth who would doubt the resurrection story. And Paul was saying, hey, look, some of you are saying the resurrection isn't real and that there's no resurrection. Hey, I just want you to know it is real and it really happened. And if you don't believe it, if you're doubting it, if you're struggling with doubt, hey, there are 500 firsthand witnesses that literally saw a resurrected Jesus in the flesh. You can go ask most of them because most of them are still alive and they're willing to talk to you about it. Paul didn't say, hey, stuff that doubt, go into church, tell everybody you feel good, you're okay. He said, no, go talk to the witnesses. Some of you might be saying, well, Sean, I have gone to the Lord and I heard nothing. Here's the only thing I could say to you about that. Because the reality is I don't know what's going on. But sometimes when I think about that, because I've gone to the Lord before with stuff that I felt like, God, I'm struggling with this, and it felt like I heard nothing from him. And what I've looked at in 2020 vision, like when you look back, right? Hindsight is always 2020. When I've looked back, I think what God is doing sometimes for us is God is doing what Jude said. God's being merciful. What do I mean? I think God's saying, hey, look, I'm not going to just come at you and like get in your face with your doubts. I'm going to lead you over time to a place that when you start to look for it, you're going to see my fingerprints all over it. Sometimes we always act like we want God to show up and get right in our face, but you really don't. He's gentle, he's merciful. It would be too much for us, wouldn't it? And so God leads us and gives us what we can handle, right? He gives us as much of himself as we can handle at the moment. So seek the Lord first directly. Second thing I would say to you when you're struggling with your doubt is, and this is obvious, this isn't groundbreaking, but seek help from other believers that you trust, right? Seek help from other believers that you trust. Look, I get that it can be fearful to think that you might be rejected by someone. That's why we don't reach out to other people, right? We don't know if they're safe. Like we don't know how they're going to react if I say, hey, man, I'm like really wrestling with doubt right now. But here's my thing. You know people over time, right? If you've been around someone long enough, you could probably take a good educated guess. And I believe that a lot of the people I know and run with, a great percentage of them, the majority of them, who are fellow believers, who when you would respond to them like this, they would be compassionate and helpful. I really believe that. I can tell you this because I believed it because I experienced it myself. All right, so most of you know this story, some of you don't. I went through a season of darkness and depression because my whole, not just like faith about myself, like where I am and who I am, although that was a part of it, but who I thought God was shaken at its core. Because what happened is the enemy did to me, or allowed things to happen to me, that shook my faith in God's goodness. Right? I've always believed that God is good, and I still believe that. But sometime around 2009, my experience started to tell me, whoa, maybe that's untrue. Right? I had lost my job in ministry for the second time in 2 years. 2 times in 2 years. And what I felt like was, Lord, I gave my entire life to serve you, and you've rejected me twice. Am I getting a sign from you here? Do you not want me, or are you rejecting me? Like, what's going on? So I started to doubt God's goodness, and I was wrestling with it, but here's the reality. I felt scared to talk to somebody because I was still, like, working for the church, but, like, I wasn't technically employed by the church, but I didn't know how to talk about this. I didn't know what to say. And so it just kind of went internal, and I went dark. Okay? And then here's something interesting happened. Something even worse happened. So not only am I unemployed and I got a part-time job that really wasn't making much money, barely skating by. My wife had worked her butt off to get her master's degree in special education, and she went on this like internship thing. She killed it on the internship. She found the perfect school for her, and they said, "We think you're perfect for this job. We would love to hire you." And she was like, "Yes, this will be a dream." And so at the end of the internship, they went up to her and she was like, "So should we talk about next year?" And they looked at her and said, "Oh, yeah, we hired someone else." And we got that call when we were out on a date in the middle of the movie theater, and she just starts bawling. And I lost it. And I just felt like, "Lord, I don't know if I believe you're good anymore." Like I almost rather believe you didn't exist, because I'm starting to feel like if you did exist, this is cruel, right? And so I went home and I called my really, really good friend Billy, and I thank God that God prompted me to call him. I called my friend Billy, and I love Billy because Billy is this combination of bold but compassionate. And as soon as he picked up the phone, I unloaded on him like a truck. Right? I just went up to him and said, "Billy, I don't know if I can believe this Jesus stuff anymore." Now, mind you, Billy's a fellow preacher, right? So I don't know. I had no idea what he was going to say. I thought he'd be like, "What? Do I need to come down there and like smack you around?" Right? There was silence on the other end. And he said, "Tell me more." So I just like rattled all this stuff off to him about everything that happened in the last year, like all this stuff. And he just looked at me and he said, "Hey, Sean, this is what I'd like you to do. Take a breath. Just breathe." He said, "Your faith is under fire right now, and that's okay. But here's what you can be certain of. God hasn't given up on you, even if you don't believe it right now. Even if you have to take a break from it right now, it's okay. He's not going to abandon you because you took a break to figure things out. God's going to be with you during it. And here's the other thing I need you to know. I'm going to be right here with you too." Like I remember just bawling like that's what he said to me. And he just said, "I'm praying for you. Reach out anytime you need it." Listen, man, if I didn't have my friend, I don't know if I would have survived it. Because here's what I know. God speaks through the people around you, doesn't he? He speaks through them. So go to the Lord directly. Seek help from other believers. And last one is this: start quickly. Why do we tend to wait? How many of us are procrastinators? Yeah, I am too, right? Some things. Well, we tend to wait. And I think we tend to wait because deep down what we hope is, this is going to go away, this is going to go away, this is going to go away. Guess what? It doesn't go away, right? Yeah, guys, how many of you get a cold and you're like, "I ain't going to the doctor. I'm going to muscle it out," right? Ain't going away, ain't going away, ain't going away. And it's just like, And here's the thing with doubt. It's natural, it's normal. I need you to know that. Like everyone experiences it. There's no one off limits from it. Everyone catches colds. It's the same thing. But the enemy uses doubt more like a disease. What he wants to do is he wants you to ignore it. He wants you to not deal with it. He wants you to have that typical stubborn mentality where you think it's just going to go away, because he knows that it will spread itself out. And just like the cut story from earlier with Mr. Newman, the quicker you treat something, the less likely it's to gain momentum, right? I think a lot of us treat doubt like it's terminal cancer, right? Like as soon as we have doubts, it's like, uh-oh, my faith is toast, right? I have it, I'm going to lose my faith. It's inevitable. But here's the reality. That's not true at all. It's a natural experience as a human. And in fact, I truly believe this because I've known many people, myself included. When you go through doubt and you fight it, when you go through doubt and you deal with it quickly, you go to the Lord directly, you seek help from other believers. When you go through all that, you come out stronger. It's a match, right? You know, we got a lot of people in this room that do some sort of martial art. And here's the thing. When you go into that cage or you go on that mat and you get beat up and you feel like, man, I just got beat up. Guess what? When you got beat up, you come out stronger, right? You go back in, you fight again, you come out stronger. And next thing you know, you're the one doing the beating up. And I feel like that's exactly what it is like faith. I go through doubts, right? I've been through doubts. The person who's purified in their faith is not the person who's never, ever doubted. It's a person that fought their doubt and overcome, right? It's Jacob wrestling God. That's what you do. You wrestle him. You're going to come out with some wounds. I'm telling you, you might even come out with a limp. But you're going to come out stronger than when you went in. Here's my prayer, and I'd love for you to join me in it. I pray, Lord, would you lead us to not see doubt as shameful, but as a condition of being a broken human. And as hurt and pain over time eat away at our faith, Lord, teach us that doubt is a condition that's meant to be dealt with, not indulged. But Lord, help us to bring it to Christ so that he can treat it. Bring it to his body that's on earth so that they can help heal. And Lord, teach the church, the collected body of believers all across the world, to be his hands and feet that bandage up the wounds of others. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you so much for this series and this time together. Lord, that we are talking about doubt and how real it is and how much effect it's had on us. Father, thank you for being a God who's big and mighty and calls us to take our doubts to you. So, Lord, I want to pray right now, if there are people in the room that are dealing with doubt, Father, first, would they go to you? And then, Lord, would they find some people that will surround them? And, Lord, lead them to do it quickly so it doesn't infect. Father, you are so good to us. And you are so merciful yourself to us when we doubt you. God, may we do that same thing for others. Father, you are the mighty God who's overcome the world. And I know for sure that that means you can overcome my doubts. We pray these things through the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.